What's up everyone, my name is Trevor and I am the Gaming Goomba. With all the hype surrounding the rumors of the Switch Pro and eventual reveal of the Switch OLED model, I was starting to get pretty upset about the fact that no one cares about the most important rumored Nintendo console that has yet to be announced. Where the hell is the Nintendo 64 Classic Edition? Unfortunately, it seems the potential for the Nintendo 64 Classic Edition is fading more and more every day. But hey, I'd say instead of dwelling on what we don't have, we celebrate what we do have. That being the NES Classic Edition and the SNES Classic Edition. These types of retro mini consoles have been around for much longer than the NES and SNES Classic Editions. Some with Atari, some with Sega, some with Intellivision, some with ColecoVision, but they are almost always super cheap feeling. Most of the time they come with AV outputs, not HDMI, and the box would boast about wireless controllers, but really it's the same technology as your basic TV remote, meaning you have to constantly be pointing the controller at the console or it doesn't work. Thank God Nintendo got around to making their own and doing it the right way. The NES Classic Edition was first announced on July 21st, 2016 with a radical reveal trailer. The console would include 30 classic games and retail for $60. Right off the bat, I thought this was a pretty damn good deal. Yes, I know all of these games can be emulated for free, but if you're a normie like me who prefers to play official releases, you learn to appreciate stuff like this. If you do the math, the Wii, 3DS, and Wii U eShops charge $5 for an NES game. 30 times 5 is $150. So you are getting $150 worth of digital NES games, a super cool looking miniature NES console, and an HDMI cable for $60. Looking back, I can't believe Nintendo released this thing for that cheap. Soon, pre-orders would open up, and I would get my first run-in with the ongoing online epidemic. Scalping. I didn't understand why I couldn't find one of these damn things. Growing up, I was the only kid who even gave a shit about all these outdated Nintendo games. Now all of a sudden, everybody and their mother wanted a piece of the retro pie? It just didn't make sense to me. Then once the articles started flooding in, it all became clear. People were taking advantage of us crazy Nintendo fans, want and need to own everything with the name Nintendo on it, especially if it was limited, for their own monetary gains. It was evil, but kinda genius. All of a sudden, just a simple pre-order for these bad boys were popping up on eBay for upwards of $300, and people actually bought them. Why? The NES Classic Edition is a cool little console, but at the end of the day, it contains 30 games that you can find for cheap in a lot of different places. It wasn't worth $300, so why were people paying that for it? I eventually picked mine up when it was actually still really hard to come by. It was my senior year of high school, and I heard a tip earlier in the day that Best Buy would be dropping a restock at some point in the early afternoon. Coincidentally enough, my literature class happened to be borrowing laptops from the library that day so we could work on our senior projects. Obviously, I didn't work on my senior project. I spent my entire class period refreshing the Best Buy page, hoping to God the restock would drop while I was still in class. It finally did, but with only about 15 minutes left of class. With the combination of Best Buy servers being overloaded and my school's shitty Wi-Fi, it was a recipe for disaster. Every single page took forever to load, and I was beginning to wonder if I could get my order placed before the bell rang. And it came right down to the wire. Miraculously, my order went through right as the bell rang, and I rejoiced. One of my friends in the class happened to be one of the other few hardcore Nintendo fans in the school, and he was congratulating me. As cool as that moment was for me, it just should have never gotten to that point. The NES Classic Edition would arrive to my house a few agonizingly long days later, and it was pretty cool. The system looked just like a tiny NES. Shocking, I know. It came with one controller with a pretty short cord. I ended up ordering a wireless one myself. The front featured a power and reset button, but the cartridge slot didn't open, unfortunately. I was kinda hoping for a little storage compartment or something. On the back of the system, it has an HDMI port and a power supply port, and that's about it. Pretty basic, but that's all it really needed. The interface was where it was at though. The menu was gorgeous. Every single game featured its original box art. The menu music was also a bop. There was also 3 video output settings, CRT, 4:3, and Pixel Perfect. The CRT mode was cute for like 2 seconds, but I don't think any sane person actually uses this setting the entire time. At least I hope they don't. You were also allowed a total of 4 suspend points per game. A pretty nice extra feature, especially for the games that didn't originally have any kind of save feature. As for the games themselves, it was a pretty rock-solid lineup. You've got the first-party classics like Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, The Legend of Zelda, Kirby, Metroid, Punch-Out!, etc. But Nintendo surprisingly went the extra mile to get a couple of key third-party titles as well. Some of the notables being Ninja Gaiden, Mega Man 2, Final Fantasy, Super Contra, Castlevania, and even Tecmo Bowl. I love Tecmo Bowl! It actually felt like every single one of these titles had some thought put into them before they were selected. I would say overall, the NES Classic Edition was actually a really good deal for the time, and a great way to preserve the history and legacy of the original NES. That brings us to the SNES Classic Edition. The SNES Classic Edition was unveiled on August 22nd, 2017 with another awesome trailer. Seriously, Nintendo, get this guy a promotion or something. This time around, the console featured 21 games and was retailed for $80. I wasn't wild about that. We got 9 less games and they were charging $20 extra for it. But if we use our eShop math, Super Nintendo games run for $8. 8 times 21 is $168, so I'd say it was still a pretty solid deal. Scalping was again an issue. Pre-orders would pop up on eBay for outrageous prices, just like last time. This time around I had a full-time job though. I didn't want to wait for a restock, so I paid $100 for mine on eBay. It was only $20 over suggested retail price, so I wasn't too hurt over it. A couple of days later, the SNES Classic Edition arrived in my mailbox, and yeah, this one was pretty cool too. This time around, the controller ports had covers that could maintain the illusion of a mini SNES. On top were the power and reset switches. Unfortunately, the eject button didn't do anything. In my opinion, wasted opportunity. Imagine if something popped out of there like a tiny SNES cartridge or something. That would have been awesome. On the back is the same thing as last time, an HDMI port and the power port. This console did, however, feature a second controller, as the SNES has a lot more two-player action to offer than the NES did, so that was a nice touch. The main interface is pretty much a copy and paste of the NES Classic Edition menu. It's nice to still have the original box arts and that bopping menu music to boot, but I don't know, I feel like they could have done a little bit more to differentiate it from the NES Classic Edition. The same display settings make a return as well, CRT, 4:3, and pixel perfect. Other than that, there isn't much else to talk about here. But of course, the main attraction is the games. There was a lot riding on the game selection for this console, as SNES games hold up a lot better than NES games. People still pay a lot of money for Super Nintendo games because they're just still really good, genuinely fun games. A lot of them being super expensive. So to have a really good library of games on this console was really important. Nintendo, of course, came packing the heat with their heavy hitters. Super Mario World, Super Metroid, A Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country, only the first one for some reason, F-Zero, Super Punch-Out, Mario Kart, Super Mario RPG, and even Earthbound, to name a few. Again, I feel like they did a really good job including some of the more notable third-party titles as well. You got Mega Man X, Castlevania 4, Street Fighter 2, Contra 3, but the main attraction was Star Fox 2. Nintendo did the unthinkable. They officially released a canceled SNES game over 20 years after its original planned release date. The ROM for this game has been floating around on the internet for a while now, but the fact that Nintendo actually acknowledged it and gave it an official release is really cool. They did still make you work for it though. You wouldn't officially unlock the game until you completed the first mission of Star Fox, and I thought that was cool too. Just a little something extra to remind you that, hey, this game being here is a pretty big deal. All in all, I again would say the SNES Classic Edition is a pretty nifty little package at a reasonable price, and a great means of playing some of these classic games. Since the Super Nintendo Classic Edition, Nintendo has seemed to abandon the Classic Edition line, which is a real shame. I have always been a big supporter of video game preservation, and these consoles did exactly that. When I have kids someday, I will definitely pull these things out. I won't have to pull the big clunky consoles out of the closet and worry about scrounging up some game cartridges. They come with official controllers and are exact replicas of the original hardware, so they will be able to see exactly what it looked like back in the day, all while playing these classic games in high definition. In fact, I would say these consoles are the perfect way to introduce your kids to the games that you played growing up. Today, Nintendo hasn't completely abandoned the retro market. Just last year they released a Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch console. This thing looks super slick, and it plays Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, and a modified version of Game & Watch Ball. But I do have a small problem with it. This thing retailed for $50, $10 less than the NES Classic Edition, and it featured 2 NES games plus a calculator game. The NES Classic Edition featured 30 NES games and was only $10 more. This seems to be what Nintendo is going to stick with, as another one for Zelda's 35th anniversary is releasing later this year. Unfortunately, Nintendo seems to be more interested in selling things at an insane price as a collectible, rather than actually giving new generations a way to play more of their classic library. My guess is that Nintendo finds too much value in the N64 library, as they are still re-releasing and remaking a lot of those games. However, I do hope Nintendo one day returns to the Classic Edition line. These systems are a great way to preserve video game history and a great way to introduce newcomers. And that brings us to the end of today's video. What do you guys think of the Nintendo Classic Edition consoles? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.